You are not alone because you choose the wrong men. You are alone because you are too intelligent for certain lies, but still vulnerable to others. And that's the trap no one ever explained to you. After 40, strong women rarely suffer because they lack options. They suffer because the options they meet activate old emotional patterns that feel like love, but aren't. And the worst part? At the beginning, everything looks promising. He is polite, interested, different from the others. You think, maybe this time will be different. But a few weeks later, small things begin to appear. Delayed replies, plans that change, mixed signals. Nothing serious enough to walk away, but enough to make you question your own perception. So you do what intelligent women do. You analyze. You observe. You try to understand. And that's exactly when the trap closes. Because smart women are rarely fooled by obvious lies. They fall into something much more dangerous. Ambiguity. And by the time you realize it, you've already invested time. You've already built expectation. You've already wondered if maybe you're being too demanding. But here's the truth almost nobody says. Smart women don't fall for the wrong men because they are naive. They fall because they know how to love deeply, and still believe emotional discernment will protect them from pain. But after 40, there are 7 specific love traps that start appearing more often. Traps that confuse even confident women. Traps that make you question your intuition. Traps that turn promising relationships into silence, frustration, and emotional exhaustion. And when you finally understand what happened, the relationship is already over. But the question remains: if you are mature, self-aware, and emotionally intelligent, why do these traps still work on you? And more importantly, which one might you be living right now without realizing it? There is something almost no one explains to intelligent women after 40. The independence that saved your emotional life also changes the way you relate to others. For years you learned how to solve everything alone. Practical problems, difficult decisions, romantic disappointments. Slowly this created a quiet sense of self-sufficiency. You can live well without anyone. But there is a hidden psychological effect behind that. The more self-sufficient you become, the more your emotional system learns not to rely on anyone. This does not happen consciously. It is a protection mechanism, an adaptation to what you lived through. Every disappointment teaches something. Every abandonment leaves a warning. And the brain records everything. Psychotherapist Esther Perel often speaks about a conflict that appears in modern relationships, especially among emotionally mature people. The conflict between autonomy and intimacy. Autonomy says, I can handle life alone. Intimacy asks for something different. It requires emotional exposure. It requires vulnerability. And that activates fear. Because when you have been hurt before, the emotional system learns a silent rule. Do not give everything at once. Observe first. Analyze first. Protect yourself first. This looks like wisdom. It looks like emotional maturity. It looks like balance. But there is an important detail hidden there. Love does not grow in completely safe territories. When two people start getting closer, something has to happen. Someone has to lower their guard. Someone has to take a small emotional risk. Someone has to allow the other person in. But women who rebuilt their lives often do the opposite. They maintain emotional control, maintain constant observation, maintain an invisible distance. And this is where the paradox many women do not notice begins. You want love, but your emotional system has been trained to survive without depending on it. So two forces begin operating at the same time. One part of you desires closeness. Another part wants absolute safety. These forces rarely move together. And that conflict complicates many relationships. Without realizing it, you start feeling more comfortable in certain dynamics. Relationships where there is interest but not full commitment. Relationships where there is chemistry but not clarity. Relationships where there is connection but also doubt. This keeps your emotional system alert. Not completely safe. Not completely exposed. A familiar emotional territory. Emotionally unavailable men often appear exactly in this space. They show enough interest to keep hope alive, but never offer complete emotional security. This creates constant tension. You try to understand, try to interpret signals, try to figure out what is happening, and before you notice, you are emotionally involved. This dynamic does not happen because you are naive. Quite the opposite. It often happens because you are intelligent. You believe that if you observe enough, you will understand the situation. That if you analyze the signals, you can avoid pain. That emotional discernment will protect your heart. But the human heart does not operate only through logic. And this is where something important begins to appear. Some of the biggest love traps do not look like mistakes. They look like caution. They look like maturity. They look like emotional control. But sometimes they are only sophisticated ways of keeping love at a safe distance. And when you finally notice this, something inside you begins to ask, if your emotional intelligence always protected you, why hasn't it protected you in love? There is a specific moment when many love stories start going wrong. That moment rarely looks dangerous. In fact, it looks promising. You meet someone interesting. The conversation flows easily. There is curiosity. There is chemistry. And something inside you begins to open again. At the beginning, everything seems normal. He shows interest, asks about your life, shares things about his. You laugh at the same things. There is a light feeling between you. It does not look like a trap. It looks exactly like the connection you were hoping for. But after some time, small signals begin to appear. Replies that take a little longer. Plans that become vague. Deep conversations that never move forward. Moments of closeness followed by distance. Nothing dramatic enough to end things, but enough to create doubt. And this is where many intelligent women enter the same pattern without realizing it. Instead of stepping back when clarity disappears, you start investing more attention. You try to understand his behavior. You analyze messages. You analyze silence. You analyze mood shifts. As if you were trying to solve a puzzle. This happens because the human brain dislikes emotional ambiguity. When something becomes confusing, the mind tries to solve it. You think you are being rational. You think you are being careful. You think you are simply trying to understand the situation better. But in practice, something else begins to happen. The more mental energy you invest trying to understand someone, the more emotionally involved you become. This is a well-known psychological mechanism. The mind starts valuing what it invests attention in. That person begins occupying space in your thoughts. And when someone occupies your mind, they slowly occupy your heart. This is how many emotionally unstable relationships gain momentum. Not through grand romantic gestures. Not through deep promises. But through small doses of attention mixed with uncertainty. This dynamic activates something powerful in the human brain. The mechanism of intermittent reward. Intermittent reward is the same mechanism that keeps people stuck in gambling. Sometimes there is attention. Sometimes silence. Sometimes closeness. Sometimes distance. The brain begins to wait for the next good moment. And that anticipation increases emotional attachment. And when you finally realize what is happening, something has already shifted inside you. You have invested emotional energy, created expectations, imagined possibilities, justified behaviors that once would have been unacceptable. And at that point, leaving no longer feels simple. Because now it is not only about him. Now it is about the story that started forming in your mind. And abandoning that story feels painful. Even when reality starts showing clear signals. Even when something inside you whispers that something is wrong. Even when your intuition tries to warn you. And this is exactly where many intelligent women get trapped. Not because they cannot see the signs, but because they have already invested too much to leave easily. And when they finally recognize the pattern, one question becomes impossible to ignore. How many times has this story started exactly the same way? If you've made it this far and something inside you started recognizing these patterns, this channel might be exactly the space your soul needed to find. Here we talk about emotional truths almost nobody explains. About love, loneliness, maturity, and inner peace. So click the button now and subscribe, because sometimes the clarity that changes our life begins with a single conversation at the right moment. And maybe that conversation is only beginning. Maybe today is the first day you truly start understanding your own love story. There is a silent emotional cost in repeating this kind of relationship. At first it feels like just another attempt to make something work. You think maybe it only requires more patience, more understanding, more emotional maturity, more tolerance for human imperfections. All of that seems reasonable. All of that seems like adult love. But slowly something inside you begins to wear down. It is not a visible drama. It is not a big argument. It is something quieter. Small frustrations accumulating. Small expectations breaking. Small moments where you feel you are giving more than you receive. And that begins to exhaust your soul. So you start making internal adjustments. You lower your expectations. You tell yourself no one is perfect. That real relationships require effort. That maybe you are being too demanding. Without realizing it, you start negotiating things that once mattered to you. And with each negotiation, something inside you adapts. This is one of the most dangerous effects of this dynamic. It does not destroy you all at once. It slowly redraws your boundaries. Today you tolerate something small. Tomorrow something a little bigger. Later you learn not to bring up certain topics. You learn not to expect certain behaviors. You learn not to express certain needs. Over time something curious begins to happen. The relationship occupies a lot of space in your mind, but very little real space in your life. You think about him. Analyze behaviors. Replay conversations. Try to predict reactions. But when you look at the concrete facts, almost nothing has actually progressed. This creates a specific type of emotional fatigue. It is not just sadness. It is mental exhaustion. Your brain keeps trying to solve a problem that never offers a clear solution. You analyze, reanalyze, try to interpret signals, as if you were searching for logic in something that was never logical. At this point, many women begin doing something that looks like love but is actually self-abandonment. They start adjusting more and more to the other person's emotional rhythm. They speak less about their needs, ask for less attention, pretend certain things do not hurt, all to keep the relationship alive. But there is a difficult truth very few people say out loud. Loving more does not fix this situation. Trying harder to please does not fix it. Being more understanding does not fix it. Because the problem was never a lack of emotional effort on your side. The problem was always the absence of reciprocity. And the longer you stay in this dynamic, the more something inside you begins to change. Hope becomes cautious. Trust becomes fragile. The joy of opening your heart becomes distant. Without realizing it, a silent belief begins to form inside you. Maybe relationships are always like this. Maybe expecting more is naive. Maybe mature love simply means learning to accept less. And when that idea begins to feel normal, something inside you slowly disconnects from your own heart. That is when loneliness becomes truly dangerous. Because now it is not just in your life. It begins to live inside you. And almost no one notices when that happens. There comes a moment when analyzing no longer solves anything. You already understand the pattern. You have seen the signs. You recognize the emotional traps that appear in these relationships. The problem now is not lack of awareness. The problem is what to do with that awareness. Because understanding something does not automatically change behavior. Emotional change requires action. The first step begins with something simple but powerful. Stop trying to interpret ambiguous behavior. For a long time you tried to decode mixed signals. Tried to understand hidden intentions. Tried to find logic in inconsistent actions. But relationship psychology shows something important. When someone is emotionally available, their behavior tends to be clear. Real interest does not require complex interpretation. Real interest shows through consistent actions, through presence, through initiative, through visible effort to build something together. When interest is genuine, it does not create constant doubt. It creates emotional calm. Learning to recognize that changes how you position yourself. That leads to the first practical step. When clarity decreases, you stop investing energy trying to understand. You observe the facts. Observe the consistency. Observe whether real reciprocity exists. And if the answer becomes too confusing, you do not try to fix the situation. You simply reduce emotional investment. This change may seem small, but psychologically it is powerful. Because it breaks the cycle of attachment created by ambiguity. Instead of spending energy trying to rescue a confusing dynamic, you begin protecting your emotional stability. This shifts the balance of the relationship, and often reveals the truth quickly. The second step involves something even deeper. Relearning how to trust your own emotional perception. Many intelligent women have been trained to question their intuition. To believe they might be overreacting. That they might be misinterpreting signals. That they should simply be more patient. This creates constant internal noise. But emotional intuition rarely appears dramatically. It shows up as quiet discomfort, as a subtle sense of misalignment, as that small internal voice saying something is not quite right. The problem is that many people learn to ignore that voice, especially when hope is involved. So the second practice is simple but requires courage. Take your emotional discomfort seriously, not as proof that something is wrong, but as a signal worth exploring. Instead of silencing intuition, you begin observing it with respect. Gradually, you learn to distinguish anxiety from emotional perception. When you start applying these two practices, something shifts. You invest less energy in relationships that lack clarity, and you pay more attention to how you feel inside the dynamic. This changes the type of connection that remains in your life. Some people quickly fade away. Others begin to show themselves more clearly. Because healthy relationships do not survive on ambiguity. They survive on consistency, on reciprocity, on real emotional presence. And when you begin requiring that level of clarity, many traps simply stop working. But there is something many women discover at this stage of the journey. Even after learning all of this, there can still be a quiet emptiness at the end of the day. Because breaking emotional patterns does not instantly solve loneliness. And that is when many people begin asking a different question. Maybe the real issue is not only how to love better. Maybe the deeper question is something else. Who is caring for your heart while you learn all of T? If you got distracted for a moment, come back here with me right now. Pay attention to what comes next, because this may be the most important part of this entire conversation. Until now, we talked about emotional patterns. We talked about choices. We talked about psychological traps that appear in relationships. All of that is real. All of that deeply affects your love life. But there is something many women only realize after many years. Not every loneliness means emotional failure. Not every relationship that ended was a loss. Not every interrupted path was a mistake. Sometimes life is simply protecting you from stories that would never bring peace. And that idea changes how you interpret the past. There is a well-known passage that says something simple but profound. Proverbs 3 verses 5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." For a long time you tried to understand everything alone. Tried to decode people. Tried to predict behavior. Tried to avoid pain through logic. But some parts of life cannot be solved with logic alone. Some parts require trust. Not naive trust in people, but a deeper trust that your story is still unfolding. That difficult chapters do not mean defeat. That some doors that closed were never meant for you. Many women carry a quiet weight when they think about their past relationships. They remember the attempts that failed. They remember promises that disappeared. They remember the time they believed they lost. Slowly, a feeling grows that something must be wrong with them. But what if that is not the real story? What if some relationships that ended were not rejections but redirections? What if certain people left your life because they were not capable of walking in the kind of love your soul truly needs? What if what you interpreted as loss was actually protection? Faith does not mean expecting romantic miracles. Faith means something quieter. It means believing your story still has purpose even when you cannot see the ending yet. It means continuing forward without letting disappointment define who you become. It means keeping your heart alive without surrendering it to bitterness. Because there is a huge difference between being alone and being abandoned. Being alone is a season of life. Being abandoned is a belief created inside the mind. And many strong women, after enough disappointment, begin confusing the two. They start believing silence means they were forgotten. But the spiritual truth is different. Your value does not decrease because someone failed to recognize it. Your story did not lose direction because some relationships failed. Your capacity to love did not disappear because some people did not know how to receive it. None of that defines who you truly are. Sometimes life simply asks for a pause. A pause to heal. A pause to reorganize your heart. A pause to rebuild boundaries that once did not exist. And during that pause, something very important begins to grow inside you. Clarity. Clarity about who you are. Clarity about the kind of love you deserve. Clarity about what you will never accept again. And when that clarity finally arrives, something shifts deeply within your soul. Because maybe the real goal of this journey was never only to find someone. Maybe it was first to find peace within yourself. And when that peace appears, something new begins to grow where loneliness once lived. That maybe now you are beginning to see your story differently. Not simply as a sequence of relationships that failed, but as a journey of emotional awareness. Each experience revealed something about you. About your boundaries. About your needs. About the kind of love that truly fits your life. For a long time you believed you only needed to find the right person. Someone who would finally make everything work. someone who would bring emotional stability, someone who would remove the loneliness at the end of the day. But emotional maturity reveals something different. No relationship replaces the peace that grows inside you. This does not mean giving up on love. It means changing the place from which you love. Before, you may have loved searching for security, searching for validation, searching to fill an emptiness. Now you can love from awareness, from choice, from the calm of someone who does not need to lose herself to keep someone. When this shift happens, something interesting begins to appear. You stop seeing relationships as solutions for your life. They become simply encounters within your journey. Some will be brief, others will be deeper, but none of them need to define who you are. This transformation changes your emotional energy. You no longer enter relationships trying to prove your value. You do not try to convince anyone to stay. You do not try to sustain connections that lack reciprocity. You observe, you listen, and you choose to remain only where genuine respect exists. That does not mean loneliness disappears overnight. Some nights may still feel quiet. Some days may still bring questions. But the difference now is profound. Loneliness stops being a sign of personal failure. It becomes simply a pause inside your story. And inside that pause, something new begins to grow. Self-knowledge, self-respect, emotional clarity. These qualities completely transform how you relate to the world. They also change the type of people who can approach you. Because when a woman finds inner peace, she easily recognizes those who live in that same emotional space. Some people may move away when they notice this new posture. Some relationships may stop making sense. And that is okay. Not every path was meant to continue forever. Some stories enter our lives only to teach something we did not yet understand. When you finally understand this, something settles within your soul. The past no longer looks like a collection of mistakes. It becomes a sequence of necessary lessons. Each experience helped you build discernment. Each disappointment revealed what truly matters. So maybe the question that started this video needs a different answer. It is not simply, why am I alone? Perhaps the more honest question is something deeper. Who are you becoming while learning all of this? Because a woman who learns to recognize emotional traps, protect her heart and trust her own value is not losing love. She is preparing herself for something far more rare. A kind of relationship built on awareness, not on emotional hunger. And when that kind of love finally appears, it does not require you to shrink who you are. It does not ask you to trade your peace. It does not force you to silence your intuition. It simply finds space inside the life you have already built. Maybe destiny is not late. Maybe it was only waiting for you to arrive here. And now that you have arrived, your real story can finally begin. And if this message resonated with you, subscribe to our channel right now. Here we explore emotional truths many women experience in silence but rarely hear explained. Each video is an invitation to better understand love, loneliness, and personal growth. This journey of awareness might be exactly what your heart needed today. And sometimes everything begins with one simple click. And if you stayed until the end of this video, leave a comment with the word clarity. This small gesture represents the moment you choose to see your story with new eyes. Many people who comment here say they feel a surprising sense of peace when they recognize their emotional patterns. May this be the beginning of a new chapter of wisdom and calm in your life. Your story is still unfolding.